Long before the palace lights ever touched her face, before the laughter, before the humiliation, before fate rewrote her destiny. Elira's world was small. Not empty, but small. A quiet home stood at the edge of the kingdom, where the roads turned from stone into dust and the voices of nobles faded into the wind. It was there she lived, far from gold and titles, in a place where survival mattered more than status. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, Elira was already awake. Grinding herbs. Boiling roots. Measuring powders with careful precision. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Her mother, once known quietly among villagers as a skilled seamstress and healer, no longer had the strength she once carried. The hands that used to stitch gowns for noblewomen now trembled with weakness. And the palace, the very palace that wore her work with pride, had not paid her in months. At first, they waited. Then they hoped. Then, they struggled. Elira, her mother's voice came faintly from the bed behind her. Elira quickly turned, setting aside the bowl she had been grinding. "I'm here." "You've done enough for today," her mother whispered, forcing a weak smile. "You should rest." Elira knelt beside her, gently adjusting the thin blanket covering her. "I'll rest when you're better." Her mother let out a quiet breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "You've always been like this, carrying more than you should." Elira didn't respond. Because it was true. There was no one else to carry it. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the worn walls of their home. Inside, the silence stretched, heavy, but familiar. Then her mother spoke again. "You need to go to the palace." Elira's hands paused. "No. You must," her mother insisted, her voice fragile but firm. "They owe us. You cannot keep pretending we'll manage without it." Elira looked away slightly. The palace was not a place for people like her. It was a world of judgment, of pride, of invisible lines she was never meant to cross. "They won't listen to me," she said quietly. Her mother reached for her hand. "Then make them." Elira hesitated. Not because she didn't understand. But because she did. Too well. Going to the palace meant stepping into a world that would see her as nothing. But staying here meant watching her mother fade. Slowly. Painfully. And that was something she could not accept. So that night, under a sky dimly lit by scattered stars, Elira made a decision that would change everything. She would go. Not as someone important. Not as someone welcomed. But as someone who refused to be ignored. The next evening, the palace stood brighter than ever. Music flowed through its grand halls. Laughter echoed beneath golden chandeliers. Nobles gathered in celebration, dressed in fabrics so fine they shimmered with every movement. It was a world built on beauty. And blind to struggle. Elira stood at the entrance for a moment. Just one moment. Her simple dress suddenly felt heavier than it was. Her breath slowed. Her heart beat louder. But then she remembered why she came. And that was enough. She stepped inside. And with that single step, she unknowingly walked straight into the moment that would define her fate. Because across the hall, watching her with sharp, curious eyes, stood the prince. Then he stepped forward. The prince. Tall. Regal. Cold. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, and then, slowly, a smirk formed on his lips. Who let her in? The laughter grew louder. And in that moment, fate quietly began writing a story no one in that room could have imagined. Her name was Elira. No one important. No title. No lineage worth mentioning. She was the daughter of a seamstress, one who worked tirelessly stitching gowns for the very nobles who now mocked her child. Elira wasn't meant to attend royal events. She wasn't meant to stand under chandeliers or walk across marble floors. But that night, she had a reason. A reason strong enough to walk into a room where she didn't belong. Her mother had fallen ill. And the palace owed them money, payment delayed for months. Elira came not for attention, but for survival. Yet survival, it seemed, had no place in a room built on pride. The prince stepped closer. Each footstep measured. each movement deliberate. "You must be lost," he said, his voice smooth, but sharp enough to cut. "No, Your Highness," Elira replied softly, her voice steady despite the weight of every gaze upon her. "I came to speak with the royal steward about a debt owed to my family." Silence. Then laughter again. But this time, it was louder. Crueler. The prince tilted his head. "A debt?" he repeated. "You walked into a royal gathering, for coins?" Elira didn't lower her eyes. "Yes." That annoyed him. Something about her calmness. Her refusal to shrink. It irritated him more than arrogance ever could. "So bold," he said, circling her slightly, like one examines something curious. "And yet, so misplaced." He stopped in front of her again. "If everyone who claimed the palace owed them something could walk in here, we would have chaos, not order." Elira swallowed. "My mother worked for the palace. She hasn't been paid. She is sick. We have nothing left." For a brief moment. Just a brief, fleeting moment. Something shifted in the prince's eyes. But it disappeared just as quickly. Replaced by something colder. "Then perhaps," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "she should have worked harder." That broke the room into laughter once more. But this time, Elira felt it. Not just embarrassment. Not just humiliation. But something deeper. A quiet, burning pain. She nodded slowly. Not in agreement. But in understanding. Understanding exactly what kind of world she stood in. "Thank you, Your Highness," she said softly. And then she turned. And walked away. That should have been the end of it. A forgotten moment in a grand hall. A poor girl humiliated, and dismissed. But fate doesn't follow expectations. It waits. It watches. And when the moment is right, it strikes. Days passed. Then weeks. And slowly, the kingdom began to whisper. The prince, known for his pride, his sharp tongue, his indifference to anything beneath his status, had fallen ill. Not a simple sickness. Not something herbs or physicians could cure. Something strange. Something no one could explain. He grew weaker each day. His strength faded. His temper worsened. And fear began to creep into the palace. Healers came from distant lands. None could help. Priests prayed. Nothing changed. The king grew desperate. And in desperation, he turned to something he once dismissed. The old traditions. Ancient whispers. Forgotten remedies. And one name kept appearing. Elira. At the edge of the kingdom, far from the marble halls and golden gates, Elira sat beside her mother's bed. Grinding herbs. Mixing remedies. Doing everything she could to keep her alive. Her mother wasn't just a seamstress. She was something more. A healer. Quietly known by those who needed help, and ignored by those who believed themselves above it. "Elira," her mother whispered weakly one evening, "you must rest." Elira shook her head. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. She was exhausted. Worn down. And still, she refused to stop. Then. A knock. Sharp. Urgent. Elira froze. No one visited them. No one came this far unless they had no other choice. She opened the door. And there they stood. Royal guards. "The king summons you." If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. The palace felt different this time. Quieter. Heavier. The laughter was gone. The pride, replaced by fear. Elira was led through long corridors until she reached a chamber guarded more heavily than any other. Inside, the prince lay on a grand bed. But there was nothing grand about the way he looked. Pale. Weak. Unrecognizable. Gone was the arrogance in his eyes. Gone was the strength in his posture. He looked human. Fragile. The king stepped forward. You are Elira? She nodded. I've heard of your mother, he said. And of you. Elira remained silent. My son is dying, the king continued. No healer has succeeded. But your name keeps appearing. Elira glanced at the prince. Their eyes met. For the first time. There was no mockery in his gaze. Only pain. And something else. Something unfamiliar. Regret. Can you help him? The king asked. Elira hesitated. Not because she didn't know how. But because she remembered. The laughter. The humiliation. His words. She should have worked harder. Her hands tightened slightly. Then. She stepped forward. Yes. Days turned into nights. Nights into exhaustion. Elira worked tirelessly. Mixing herbs. Whispering ancient remedies. Watching. Waiting. Fighting something she couldn't fully see, but could feel. And slowly. The prince began to change. His breathing steadied. His strength returned. Color crept back into his face. And one evening. He spoke. Elira. Her name, softer than before. She looked up. Yes, your highness. He was quiet for a moment. I remember that night. Of course he did. I was cruel. She said nothing. I thought, he paused, searching for words he wasn't used to saying, I thought power meant I could say anything. Do anything. Elira met his gaze. And now? He looked away briefly. Now I know, power means nothing, when you can't even save yourself. Silence settled between them. Not heavy. Not uncomfortable. Just, honest. I'm sorry, he said. And for the first time. Elira believed him. Weeks later. The prince stood again. Strong. Alive. Changed. The kingdom celebrated. But something had shifted. Not just in him. But in everything. The king kept his promise. Elira's family was paid. More than owed. Offered a place in the palace. A life far from struggle. But Elira hesitated. Because she knew. Palaces came with shadows. And she had once stood in one, and been laughed at. Then. The prince approached her. No guards. No pride. Just him. I owe you my life, he said. You don't owe me anything, she replied. He shook his head. No. I owe you more than that. He took a breath. Something he had never done before in front of anyone. He humbled himself. I want you to stay. Elira studied him. Why? Not as a challenge. But as truth. The prince smiled slightly. Because you see me, not the crown. Silence. Then he added softly. And I want to learn how to be the man you believed I could be, even when I wasn't. That surprised her. Because she hadn't believed in him. Not then. But maybe. Now. She could. Time passed. Not in rushed moments. But in slow, meaningful change. The prince became kinder. More thoughtful. Less feared. More respected. And Elira remained by his side. Not as a servant. Not as someone beneath him. But as something else. Something neither of them expected. Something fate had quietly been building from the moment they met. The day of the royal announcement came. The entire kingdom gathered. Whispers filled the air. Speculation. Curiosity. The prince stepped forward. Confident. But different. Not the same man who once mocked a girl for being misplaced. He raised his hand. Silence fell. I stand here today, he began, alive, because of someone this kingdom once overlooked. Murmurs spread. And I stand here today, knowing that strength is not found in power, but in compassion. He turned. Elira stepped forward. Gasps echoed through the crowd. The woman who saved me, is the woman I choose to stand beside. And then, he did the unthinkable. He knelt before her. "I once mocked you," he said, his voice steady, but filled with something deeper now. "But fate had other plans." He looked up. "Not as a prince, but as a man. Will you be my bride?" The same hall. The same people. The same place where laughter once filled the air. Now, silence. But not the same kind. This time, it was awe. Elira looked at him, remembering everything. The pain. The growth. The change. And she realized something. Fate hadn't just changed his life. It had changed hers too. She smiled softly. Yes. And just like that, the girl who was once laughed at became the queen they never saw coming.